Bibles, you can turn to the book of Romans. We're going to be in chapter 3. But today we're starting a new series of messages, and it's from that book, from Kyle Idleman's book, Grace is Greater. And what we do, we've typically done this over these past several years. It seems like in the fall we'll kick off and do like a church-wide campaign where we'll use a book and we'll use sermon material and small group material and it seems like we've had great response throughout the years. And so we're starting that today. And so it's a great time for this to be your first Sunday. We'll do 4 weeks talking about how grace is greater. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but every year new words get added to our dictionary. Right? You would think, you would think that sort of the English language is sort of finished, right? But it isn't. I mean, new words come about all the time. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to put some new words. These are real words that have been added to the dictionary. I want to see if you know what these words mean. Okay? So if you know what they are, you can shout it out. It's okay. Here's the first word. The first word is phonesia. Phonesia. Right? Anybody have any idea what that means? What is it? Forget where your phone is? Is that what most people are saying? I think it's probably the common definition. What we think, right? I mean, you've done that. You put your phone down somewhere and like, I have no idea where I put my phone, right? That's actually not phonesia. Phonesia, here it is. The real definition is the act of dialing a phone number and forgetting who you were calling just as they answer. Right? Have you ever done that? You're like, it starts ringing, you're like, I have no idea who I'm calling, right? And then they answer, and maybe you remember, maybe you don't. Here's another word, disconfect. Any idea what that word may mean? Disconfect? Nobody? It's going to take a stab at that one. Disconfect is an attempt to sterilize a piece of candy that you dropped on the floor by blowing on it. Right? Disconfect. I guess it used to be the old 5-second rule, used to say. But that's what disconfect is. I saw a certain football coach recently drop a hot dog off the grill, picked it up and blew on it before he ate it. I don't know if that qualifies for disconfect or not, but same idea, right? Here's another one. Blame-storming. Blame-storming. Any idea what that one is? Figuring out who's to blame? Yeah. When I first saw that, I thought maybe barnstorming. You remember what barnstorming? Maybe you used to have barnstorming tours. Sometimes you think of that as in politics. We used to have in Kentucky barnstorming tours where old UK basketball players would go to the different gyms and do exhibition games. Or maybe you think brainstorming when you see that word. Blamestorming is we're actually pretty close. It's sitting around in a group and discussing who's responsible for the company's problems rather than trying to solve them. That's blamestorming, right? It kind of sounds silly, but apparently it happens. It's a real word. And then, of course, there's probably all kinds of words, new words that we could talk about, and maybe we could guess some definitions. But this morning, we're going to be talking about a word that you're probably very familiar with. And in fact, what happens is when we're familiar with certain things or certain words particularly, we tend to overlook them. And so here's what I want to ask you to do as we study over these upcoming 4 weeks. I want to ask you to approach this word like you've never heard it before. Right? Like it's a completely blank slate. Several years ago, Kellogg's Cornflakes came out with a commercial. And the people at Kellogg's had discovered that people had, through research, that they had eaten cornflakes when they were young, but they hadn't bought a box in a really long time. And so they came up with a commercial campaign, and their ad simply went like this: Kellogg's Cornflakes, taste them again for the first time. And so that's sort of what we're going to do with this word grace. We're going to sort of taste it again for the first time, right? We're going to, if you've already got a working definition in your head what grace means, just kind of put that on the back burner a little bit. Because like anything that we're overly familiar with, we can miss the power and miss the significance. Hebrews 12:15 says this. It says, see to it that no one misses the grace of God. See to it that no one misses the grace of God. And so as we study over these upcoming weeks, my prayer, my hope is that you will not miss God's grace. That you won't miss the grace of God. I mean, how tragic would it be to be part of a church and yet miss grace? How tragic would it be to be part of a church and have church leaders who miss out on grace and pass the burden of religion to those under their care. I've seen that. You probably have as well. And what happens, we know that things turn toxic in a hurry. Now, in order for us to understand this word, like we're hearing it for the first time, you need to understand that we can't talk about grace without first talking about sin. And I know that that's no fun. I mean, who wants to talk about sin, right? I mean, and I know sometimes the churches even sort of avoid it. But I don't know how you can talk about Jesus as the Savior unless you talk about what He saved you from. Right? And so the most basic thing that we have to come to understand is that you and I were sinners. Right? We know this. In fact, Romans 3:23, this is probably a verse that you're very familiar with. Romans 3:23, and begins in verse 22, but we'll just start there in verse 23. It says, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, pretty much all means all, right? This isn't really a gray matter. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. In fact, if you were to back up there in verse 22, Paul writes that there's no difference between Jew and Gentile. Now, if you were a Jew, you would immediately object. You would say, well, of course there's a difference, right? We've got the law. They have no morals. They're like animals. They would take offense to that. And yet we do the same thing sometimes. I mean, in our minds we think, well, there's a difference, right? Because here's what happens. You begin to compare yourself with other people. And you always do, inevitably, you always compare down, right? You compare yourself with somebody who's much worse. You think, that my friend or that person on TV, I mean, compared to them, I'm a great person, right? I mean, compared to what they've done. But you know what you're doing when you do that, actually? You're sinning. Did you know that? That's called pride. That's called self-righteousness. When you look at somebody else, you say, I'm better than her, and I'm better than him, so surely God's going to have to accept me based on that. That's actually sin. The Bible talks about sin like it's a virus or a sickness. My wife Jenny will tell you that I don't really like to admit when I'm sick. When I'm sick, I sort of just, when I wake up and I don't feel good, in my mind I'm thinking, there's nothing wrong, right? I'm going to go on. I'm not sick. I'm going to go out about my business. And unless it's just really bad, I do it. I go to work. I just go through my normal routine. I just convince myself that all is good, right? And I don't know if you do that or not, if you're like me or not, but when we do that, because here's what happens, if we have to acknowledge that we're sick, we have to acknowledge that something has to change, right? I mean, if you're like me, I thrive on routine. I don't want my calendar disrupted because I know I have things to do. But I've discovered that just pretending not to be sick isn't a very good method of getting better. In fact, oftentimes it just makes things worse. And so when you hear someone talk about grace as the cure for your sickness, and you're not all that convinced in your mind that you're really sick, that's a problem, right? But Scripture God clearly disagrees with your outcome. You are sick. We are all sinners. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. That's the diagnosis, right? Here's the prognosis. Romans 6:23. You can flip there if you want. The wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. All right, we're all sinners. All have sinned. All have fallen short of God's glory. The wages of sin is death. And so you may be a better person than me, but you're still a sinner nonetheless. And the wage of your sin is death. Everybody's heard of the Zika virus, probably. There's no known cure for Zika. It's happened in places largely far away from the United States. And the chance of us, of that coming over here and spreading is very, very low. But can you imagine, you probably heard maybe doomsdayers say, well, what would happen if Zika came here and spread like wildfire? It would be devastating, right? Highly unlikely, but it's a scary thought. But this is the way the Bible describes sin. It talks about it like a virus. Right? It's spread all over the whole world. And like the Zika virus, it was originated with a host carrier. When sin entered into the world and contaminated us, you know what it did? It separated you and I from God. Romans 5 says it like this, and we're sort of bouncing around. Typically, I just stay in one section and we just stay with it. We'll actually be here in Romans 5 a little bit longer. But it says this, therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. See, it all started with Adam. And so as a result, everyone has infection. We're all sinners. We all have a death coming, right? And not just a physical death, which we know unless the Lord returns, that's going to happen, but an eternity where we are separated from God because of our sin. Right? We've been diagnosed. You have the virus. I have the virus. And you're probably thinking, man, thanks for inviting me to church today, right? I mean, what an encouraging day this is. You're telling me I'm sick, right? I could have stayed home. But there's good news, right? Because an antidote is available. An antidote is available. Romans 5:15 says, the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and gift that came by the grace of one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? See, the bad news is that we're sinners. We've been infected with sin. We are separated from a holy God as a result. But the good news is this. Grace is greater. God's gift to you is His grace through Jesus Christ. Do you remember this symbol in school? Some of you remember that. Some of you kids, you already have that right now, right? That's the greater than symbol. I was always taught, maybe you were too, that the open part of that was like an alligator and it ate the smaller number or something like that. Anyway, I think that's the way it works. But anyway, the greater number goes on the outside of it, right? Remember that? But when it comes to grace, the Bible here in Romans 5 reminds us that nothing is equal or greater than grace. Right? I want you to understand this. Catch this. Nothing is equal to or greater than grace. Whatever you put on the other side of that equation, grace is greater. Whatever sin you put into your head, whatever mistake, whatever season of life you want to regret, whatever that is, grace is greater. Grace is greater than your sin. Paul says it like this in verse 16. He says, nor can the gift of God be compared with the result of one man's sin. Again, he's contrasting how this all works, right? Sin came in through Adam. With the second Adam, Jesus came and he took care of it. The judgment that followed one's sin and brought condemnation. But the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. For if by the trespass of the one man, death reigned through that one man, check this out, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and of the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ? See, this is so important for us to understand. And maybe this is a reminder for some of you. Maybe this is brand new for others. But this is the foundation of the gospel message. This is the good news that we carry as a church. The result of God's gift is different than Adam's sin. Adam's sin, which infected us, the sin virus, led to condemnation. But God's free gift, which is available to all, leads to our being made right through Jesus Christ. That's grace. Right? That's grace. Grace makes you right with God even though you're guilty of sin. Grace makes you right with God even though you're guilty of sin. Grace is great. And that's good news. That's the gospel. And you know who that's for? That message is for you. That message is for you. Because here's what happens so frequently. And listen, I know this mindset gets into the church, right? Here's what happens so frequently. Grace gets missed. We miss grace. See, I can stand up here all morning and talk about God and leave grace out of the whole equation. But you know what? That's what we're left with when that happens. You're left with religion. And if you've been around here very long, you know that I'm not a big fan of this kind of religion. And Jesus wasn't either. Because when you remove grace from the equation, it gets changed. Right? The equation gets changed. And so now, instead of grace being greater than anything else on the other side of that equation, now I have to start coming up with my own formula. So now if I take grace out of the equation, I have to count up my religious good deeds. My ability to be good, my ability to be able to keep the rules, all that stuff that I think is just, good, and then I have to put that on the other side of the equation. And then on the other side over here, then I have to say, well, all those times I've blown it, all those mistakes I've made, and let's have to hope that the good outweighs the bad. That's religion, right? See, that's what you study world religion. This is what you come up with. Other than Christianity, this is the formula. But grace is greater. Here's what I want you to think about. When it comes to religion, I want you to think of some words. I'm going to put them up here on the screen. See, the key word for every religion is do. It's do. You have to do good deeds. You have to pray so many times a day. Work extra hard. Do, and then you might make the cut. Grace, however, is based on what has been done. It's based on what is done. It's the finished work of Jesus on the cross. He is sat down now next to the Father in heaven. Here's another word. Outward. Outward. We saw examples of this in the New Testament with Jesus, right? Jesus would criticize the religious leaders of his day, and he would say things to them like, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. Or you look really religious on the outside with your beads and your clothes and everything on, but on the inside, you're like a tomb with dead men's bones in it. See, the focus of religion is on outward appearance or our outward self, but the focus of grace is inward. It's all about transformation. It's all about the heart. Here's another word that pertains to religion I want you to think about. Third word is rules. Typically what happens in religion is that we actually come up with rules beyond the rules, right? That's called legalism. And grace obviously recognizes that God has certain guidelines or rules, if you want to call them that, in our life that He gives us for our benefit. But it isn't my ability to keep the rules that makes me right with God. It's His mercy. And as grace changes us, as grace has changed me, as grace changed you, we begin to delight in God's law. We desire to be holy. It's incredible. It's just totally backwards than what we might imagine or think. Here's another word I want you to think about as it pertains to religion. It's the fourth word is shame. It's shame. Religion tries to control people. It tries to make them feel bad. Now, this is different than actually being convicted of your sin. Of course, there will be times when God convicts us of wrongdoing, right? And you need to pay attention when the Holy Spirit convicts you of your sin. You need to listen. He does that to me regularly. But conviction without the gospel, right? When there's guilt without a cure, that's religion. When there's guilt without grace, that's religion. It's different than following Jesus. And then finally, religion leaves you with a feeling of fear. The fifth word is fear, right? And this again, it creeps into churches sometimes even today. They may say, well, if you miss the service and the Lord returns, it may be bad for you. Or, if you haven't been doing X, Y, Z, or if you have been doing, you're going to go to hell. Religion leaves you frustrated, and it leaves you fearful. And so you got all of these things associated with religion. And then here comes grace. And in grace, we discover freedom. With religion, you feel this pressure to measure up constantly. And the outcome, you know what the outcome of religion always is? It's either pride or guilt. Right? It's either pride or you either sit around proud and self-righteous because of everything that you've done, or you constantly feel guilty because you think, I haven't done enough. And there I've gone and messed up again. Right? So I hope you're beginning to understand. Right? Just get a little picture that grace is greater. Grace is greater than religion. Religion can't deal with the sin virus. Only grace can. Religion can't clean you up. Religion can clean you up rather on the outside, but only grace can change your heart. Right? But I've come to understand this. Grace isn't just something that we can learn in a classroom, or maybe even from a sermon, right? Grace has to be experienced. It has to be experienced. And again, my hope for you is as we go through this is that you won't just learn what grace is, but that you'll actually experience grace. A couple of weeks ago, I was working out, and I was listening to a sermon while I was actually working out. And the preacher during the sermon, during the message, he was talking about grace. And it was a great message, a powerful message. And so here I am, and I'm at the gym, and I'm supposed to be pumping iron and being tough, right? And, all that. And then a song plays. It began to play Amazing Grace. And here I am again, just trying to, and this song starts playing, and I start just tears just flood my eyes. I mean, here I am, down here at the gym, and my face is just wet from tears because I've experienced that, right? I mean, that song moves me because I know what it's like to be lost. I know what it's like to be, to be saved. A wretch like me to be saved. And all I could do was just sort of just shake my head and think, yes, Lord, I thank you for that. And then I kind of clean up and look and make sure nobody else was looking at me and get back in the mirror. But it's impactful because I've experienced grace, right? Grace has to be experienced. E.B. White says, grace can be dissected like a frog, but the thing dies in the process. And so this isn't just something that you learn. This isn't just a definition that I'm going to give you over these upcoming weeks. I want you to experience it personally. Jesus tells a story in John chapter 8. You're welcome to turn there. It's going to be up on the screen as well. And it's about a woman who experienced God's grace personally. Jesus is teaching in the courtyard early one morning, and we're not sure exactly what he's teaching about, but it's pretty good because everybody showed up and they got out of bed early, and so they're listening to Jesus teach, and all of a sudden, he's interrupted by this angry mob of people. They come running through the gates, and everyone turns from Jesus, and they turn their attention to this mob. And they take this spiritual leader today, they take this lady to Jesus, and they push her down in front of Jesus, and presumably she's not dressed in much more than a bedsheet. And the mob shoves her to the ground in front of him, and one of the spiritual leaders looks at Jesus, and he says, hey, this woman, and I think it should be up on the screen, John chapter 8, verse 4, teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law tells us to stone such women. What do you say? And you're familiar with this. That's probably tough to read, but you're familiar with the story, right? She says, look, she's been caught. She's an adulterer. The law says we stone her. We kill her. What do you say? And Jesus doesn't say anything at first. He knows it's a trap. And he bends down. Remember, he bends down and starts writing in the dirt. Well, we don't know what he's writing. Maybe it's a good question to ask him someday. What was that you were writing in the dirt where those guys came? But one of the religious leaders say to Jesus, hey, Jesus, what should we do? And then Jesus stands up and he looks around. Remember what he says? He says, let any of you who's without sin, well, you cast the first stone, right? You throw the first stone at, and he goes back down and starts writing in the dirt again. And then one by one, all these guys, they drop their rocks there in the dirt, and they walk away. And Jesus is left with this woman. And he's now left with this woman. And she looks at him, and his eyes aren't full of condemnation. His eyes aren't full of judgment. He says to you, where's your accusers? Is there no one left here to condemn you? And he says, neither do I condemn you. Now go leave your life of sin. Now think about the gravity of this for a moment. For just a moment. She is guilty. She has been caught in the act. The door is ripped open. She is pulled from her bed. There's no question about her guilt. This is the worst day of her life. Her darkest secret has been found out. But listen, her worst day becomes her best day. Because in her brokenness, she meets Jesus. She meets Jesus. And this is so important. This was important for her, and it's important for you. She learned that day, secondly, that grace is greater than your secret. Grace is greater than your secret. And I imagine for this lady, all of her worst fears, her fear was just that somebody's going to find out, right? Adultery is a serious offense. It was punishable by death. And while your secret may not be as serious as that, you fear being exposed because of the repercussions. And I get that. But here's the thing. Your secret's making you sick. Your secret's making you sick. You think the worst thing that can happen is that somebody finds out. But the truth of the matter is that God's grace is greater than your secret. God's grace is greater than your secret. And this may mean that you have to drag your secret, kicking and screaming, out of the darkness into the light. It does not want to be exposed. And you may have to deal with some serious repercussions for the fallout as a result. But listen to me. Don't live with that anymore. It doesn't mean that you have to stand up here and confess it publicly. I'm not saying that. But don't live with your secrets. Bring it out of the darkness into the light and see what God's grace, that it's greater than your secret. Discover the truth that in order to be whole and healthy, that your relationship with others and your relationship with God, your sin needs to be exposed. It needs to be dragged out of the darkness into the light. Kyle Idleman tells about a book that he read. It's called Post-Secret. He said, doesn't recommend it's dark. But the author, Frank Warren, printed 3,000 postcards. And on these postcards, he said, you're invited to anonymously contribute a secret to a group art project. He said you can reveal anything that you want to as long as it's true and you've never shared it with anyone else before. And so he left these cards in public spaces where people could fill them out and mail them into him. And then he published these. He published a book of them. Some are weird, some are funny, some are kind of disturbing, he said. One woman said this. She wrote this. I think women who don't wear makeup are lazy. That was her secret, right? Big woo, right? Didn't want to let that one out. That's what she wrote. Then another woman wrote this. She said, when I'm mad at my husband, I put boogers in his soup. It's hard to go up. Another one said, I'm afraid of women who wear capri pants. That was their big secret. Some of these were a little more upsetting. This person said, every time I get my toenails done, I want to kick the girl doing them in the face. Another one said, I hate people who include me in group texts. One said, I give decaf to customers who are rude to me. I don't blame them for that. But many of these secrets are really sad, right? They're really sad. One said that I wish my father had forgiven me while he was still alive. Someone said, sometimes I wish I was blind just so I wouldn't have to look at myself in the mirror every day. One person said, my husband doesn't know that he's raising his best friend's child. One said that when I sleep with my wife, I feel like I'm unfaithful to my lover. One person said, I haven't spoken to my dad in 10 years and it kills me every day. One person said, when I eat, I feel like a failure. Another said, I'm only happy when I buy things. And the last one of the book was interesting. He said, this person said, I've told all my secrets, now I'm free. But you'll never experience true freedom without the grace of God in your life. When you finally confess, when you finally repent, and you discover that secret inside of you is making you sick, and it's contaminating your relationship with God, and it's contaminating your relationship with other people, you'll discover that God's grace is greater than your secret. He can remake you into the person that you're created to be. And you know what else you'll discover, church? You'll discover that grace is greater than your shame. Grace is greater than your shame. Think about this woman again in John chapter 8. She is left all alone with Jesus. And she's humiliated. She's ashamed. And Jesus says to her, I don't condemn you. Now leave your life of sin. As Amy sang about earlier, he gives her a second chance. She's not just free from her condemnation. She's not just free from the penalty of death. She deserves to die under the law. She's given freedom for a new start. That's the gospel message. It's the gospel message. Because of Jesus, church, you have been set free from condemnation. Because of Jesus, you have been set free from the penalty of death. And because of Jesus, God gives us a brand new start. So many of you, I think you need to just be reminded, you hear this, that what Jesus says to this girl, he says to you, I don't condemn you. Leave your life of sin. Start all over. Get that junk in the dark. Let's begin. Brand new. Some of you today, you need to experience that freedom. You need to experience that freedom. Others of you, you need to be reminded that you've been called to be set free. Because here's what happens. Here's what happens. If you've confessed your sin, and you've exposed that junk to the light, you've trusted Jesus for His grace, and you're walking with Him, listen, church, it's time to put the shame away. Some of you are remembering what God has chosen to forget. Right? And listen, I know, unfortunately, part of the problem is that churches sometimes continue to hold that junk over people. They say, well, since you did that awful thing 3 or 4 years ago, you're not qualified to do this or that here, right? Jesus said, what are you talking about? I buried that sin. I removed that as far as the east is from the west. Now, sometimes churches just want to remind people of their sin and sort of make them feel bad, but the Bible says Jesus came to set you free. He set you free from it, not just sin, but the guilt that comes with it. That old song, Rock of Ages, was right. Jesus is our double cure. He saves us not only from the wrath of God, but He also makes us pure. He frees us from our guilt. Frees us from it. You know, in the back of your bulletin, hopefully you got one of these, but I put that little equation. And I made sure there's plenty of pens all over, everywhere. All the pews should have, there should be 3 or 4 in every pew. But what I want you to do, and I want you to do it either now would be great, or if you want to take it home and do it later on. I just want you to write the thing for you in your life that grace is greater than for you. All right, just a reminder. Maybe it's the thing that Satan just tries to remind you of constantly, the thing that maybe perhaps you're most ashamed of. To just be reminded that grace is greater. That grace is greater. Maybe it's your divorce. Maybe it's your addiction. Maybe it's your abortion. Maybe it's your anger. Maybe it's your affair. Maybe it's your pride. Maybe it's your dishonesty. Maybe it's selfishness. Understand, no matter what it is that grace is greater. And not only is grace greater, but by the power of God, again, as we're saying so beautifully, you can be made brand new. This isn't just about forgiveness and this God being just showering His love. Grace should change your life. It should make you a totally different person because of what God is doing. You ought to see evidence of God's grace in your life each day. Matt Chandler tells a story about his freshman year in Bible college. He met a young single mom named Kim. And he and some of his friends there in the seminary wanted to introduce her to God. So one night, Matt invites Kim, along with some of his buddies, to go to a Christian concert. And he said after the band plays, the preacher gets up and he starts talking about sex. Right out of the gate, he's angry. He's talking about STDs, statistics. He holds out a red rose. And he said the rose was beautiful and new, and he looked nice, and he smelled it, and he said it smelled so good. He said, what I want you to do is I want you to take this, and he passed it out. He said, I want everybody to touch it. I want everybody to smell it. And he passed that out, and he said, a little bit later on, I'm going to ask for the rose back. You can bring it back up later. And he continues to preach about sex. He's angry. He's raising his voice, pointing his finger. And Matt said he's just sitting there next to Kim, who's this young single mom. She's got a pretty rough past, and she just has her head down in shame. And the preacher concludes his sermon and says, okay, now, somebody bring that rose back up to me. I need that up here. So they brought it back up to him, this preacher on stage, and by now, as you can imagine, passing around to hundreds of thousands of people. it's completely broken. Half the petals are gone. And the preacher holds up this broken flower and he says, okay, now who would want this? Right? It's been handled. It's been broken. It doesn't even smell like a rose anymore. Who would want this? Nobody wants this. Nobody would buy this. And Matt's sitting there next to this young lady. And he said everything in him wanted him just to stand up and say, Jesus wants that rose. Jesus bought that rose. That's the whole point of the gospel. That he who knew no sin became sin so that for us so that in him we could become the righteousness of God. That's the gospel message. That's the whole reason that Jesus came, to make things new. The whole reason that Jesus came was to take that which was broken and turn it into something beautiful. That's what he wants to do with your life. That's the message. Jesus wants a broken rose. And the word for that is just simply grace. Grace is greater. Grace is greater. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, God, thank you that we don't have to stand condemned because of our shortcomings. But God, that Jesus came and freely died for me and for us. Lord, my prayer is that today, if there's any here who've never received that grace and trusted you, Father, that they would do so today. Lord, may they understand this isn't just something that you just shower on. God, this is a faithful relationship that we have with you. You hold it out to us, but we have to receive it. God, thank you for the grace that you've showered upon me and this church. And again, Lord, we pray if there's any today who needs that grace, we reach out to you. Pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. And we're going to be standing.